Peter, this is something that I wanted to tee up for you to talk about since you are really tapped into the kind of history of Republican control of the levers of government and especially the last kind of 10 years of tax policy. The context here is that the Republicans took over the federal government. Now we're still waiting on results on the House, but they're in control and there are a number of concrete proposals on the
Yeah.
table. So why don't you talk about kind of where things stand in terms of control, and then we'll
Yeah.
talk maybe about those implications.
Yeah. So in late 2017, when Trump had just been elected and Republicans controlled both houses of Congress, they passed a significant tax reform called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act under a budget procedure called budget reconciliation. They were able to pass it with a bare majority of votes in the Senate. They didn't have to worry about the filibuster, which requires 60 votes to overcome in the Senate. They were able to pass this pretty ambitious agenda. The catch was that under the budget reconciliation rules, the changes mostly couldn't last forever. And so they can only last for basically 10 years. But because of sort of technical budget rules and the way that certain tax changes have trailing implications, they had to make them expire at the end of 2025. And so about 8 years after they were enacted. And so now we're, 7 years later, 8 years later, really. And all these changes are coming up for renewal. The question before the election was, if Democrats win, will they extend these changes? Probably not for most of them. If Republicans win, will they extend the changes? And the answer is that Republicans support extensions and a few other changes too. The issue is that while Republicans have a pretty comfortable majority in the Senate, 53 votes, their House majority is pretty narrow. It looks like it's going to be maybe 221 Republicans in the House and 214 Democrats or something close to that. And so that leaves not a lot of room for error. A related issue is there's large deficits, and the pure extension of the 2017 law would increase debt even more. And there's a lot of Republicans in the House and Senate who are worried about deficits. And so the deficit issue creates some challenges politically, especially because they can't afford to lose more than maybe three members of the House. So
And,
it'll be interesting to see what happens.
and so, Peter, I guess first of all, real-time updates. I just saw another vote dump in Pennsylvania with Senator Casey making up significant ground. So it sounds like some folks are maybe walking back that call. That's not going to change the balance of power. It's either going to be 53-47 or 52-48 in the Senate. As you said, the House is very likely to be about 220, 221 for the Republicans. I think there are two kind of types of question here. One is about process. How many votes would the Republicans need for what they want to implement? And then the second is, are they going to get whatever that number is? And so on the first question, you mentioned reconciliation. There's a factual question and a process question here, which is, are the Republicans talking about using reconciliation again? And if so, is that something that we expect that they'll be able to do?
Yeah, so basically they're going to have to use reconciliation in order to get these changes through, unless they can get 7 Democrats in the Senate to vote for it, which isn't going to happen in today's political environment. So they have to use reconciliation, which means most of these extensions will be temporary extensions, probably through around 2033.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the changes might be permanent if they're able to find permanent financing for them. But most of the changes will be temporary. They only need bare majority, so 50 votes in the Senate plus the VP, and in the House they just need 218 votes. So they can, depending on where things come out in the House, that they probably have about 3 votes to spare in the House, which isn't a lot.
Yeah, I'm going to throw another real-time question at you. Does the Senate just decided on a leader? In your view, does the outcome of that fight with the more extreme candidate losing, I suppose, alter your view of how this plays out at all?
I don't think so. Yeah, Thune is kind of the establishment candidate, and so I think he's not going to disrupt expectations very much.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to kind of lay the groundwork for what we're going to talk about in the specific proposals that we'll get to. In general, there's not a lot of daylight, am I right, between the administration and Congress on these questions. Of course, around the fringes, there's the deficit hawks, there's the Freedom Caucus. There may be some battling on the margins, but for the most part, am I right that the administration either hasn't taken a position, in which case you'd expect that they'd
Yeah.
kind of go the Republican line, or has come out in favor of the sorts of things that Congress is putting on the table here.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think internally, Republicans have had a lot of these debates over the last few years. And so I think most of the big potential snags have already been sort of pre-worked out.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still a bunch of stuff that is a little bit up in the air, including how much they're willing to increase the deficit.
Yep, the deficit is one. I think something that's maybe slightly contentious and doesn't cut perfectly across party lines is something that Davey just mentioned in the chat, which is the SALT deduction.